All right, we have made it to the Shipwatch section. I had to stretch, grab a drink, and stand up for this one. There is so much to talk about in this episode. Just to rehash the preamble that I gave at the very beginning, this section is not just for shippers. I titled it that because I want to attract shippers here, because of their ability to analyze the dynamics between characters and just kind of do it all day so that they come to me with further insights and further information that I would have never gotten on my own. I could have named this section the character dynamic analysis section, and it would have been the same thing. So we're not going to get all Tumblr-y and all AO3 on here. I'm not going to be talking about fan fiction or shipping posts on social media. We're just going to be analyzing the dynamics between Carol and Zosia, the Stursia ship, because this is such a character dynamic driven show. This is a show that does character dynamics as the narrative itself. It is a sci-fi show. But hopefully by this point, you have learned that it is not like Star Trek or like Star Wars. It is not about the sci-fi technology. That is the setting. That is the thing that motivates the conflict, that keeps the story moving forward. But it is not about those things. It is about Carol, her becoming whatever she will become in the future, and how she interacts with the pluribus, how the pluribus interacts with her, and how everyone interacts with all of the survivors, and what information and what messages we can extract from that in the real world. However, as I've said over the course of this episode, so much of Carol and Zosia's interactions, even quite frankly, I think every single one of Carol and Zosia's interactions have been them scheming against one another. They are it's almost playful in a way how they are trying to manipulate one another, with Carol trying to gather as much information as she can to hopefully figure out a way to reverse this thing. And with the pluribus through Zosia attempting to slow Carol down as much as she can, if not bring Carol to a complete stop through the overwhelming emotional attachment they are trying to get Carol to build with Zosia. So the main theme for this Shipwatch is who is playing who. There's a lot of games in this episode, a lot of activities, a lot of playful, friendly competition, masking the very real and threatening and aggressive charm offensive that the two of them are engaging toward one another. Let's go down before we continue, where we left off, which is the scene where Zosia drops off the markers for Carol, and we continue through the rest of the episode, which is Carol and Zosia focused with not much new information given. That is why we switched over to the Shipwatch section in the first place. But let's go down the list of their interactions up until this point. First off, the episode opens up with Carol making some punch for Zosia and herself. We see that Carol asks Zosia not to get up right here, and then Zosia gets up anyway. I mentioned when this scene happened that, some people might have considered it to be nothing, but I think this episode I would describe it as being very sensitive. It's a sensitive episode, not sensitive emotionally, sensitive as in its narrative techniques. The story that it's telling is very intricate. There's a lot of hinting, a lot of foreshadowing, a lot of layering. And so it takes a very sensitive eye to fully extract all of what we are getting here. I don't think I got at all of it. I don't think I'm anywhere close to getting all of it. But we will start with their first interaction, which I just said, was that Carol asks Zosia, she tells her, don't get up, as she's about to set the punch on the table. Zosia gets up anyway and clears the table. That is their first interaction, the first dialogue of this episode between the two of them. A Zosia and Carol centric episode. Intros and conclusions are they're always intentional. The way an episode starts off is very intentional. We started off with Manusos, but after the intro, the first scene is an act of a command from Carol and abject defiance from Zosia. As we'll see continuously throughout the episode, it's played in a playful manner, in a well-mannered, good-natured spirit. But that doesn't take away the fact that this is not an interaction between a regular human and a regular human. This is an interaction between Carol, a regular human, and the pluribus. So just as we would try in real life not to anthropomorphize animals and say that, oh, because, this polar bear has a very neutral facial expression and it's walking towards me very languidly and calmly, that it is experiencing languid and calm and non-threatening emotions toward me, because that is how a human would look in that situation. No, that is a different species, a different animal. You cannot anthropomorphize and translate how a regular human would communicate with how the pluribus is communicating here. The pluribus has been shown time and time again to be highly literal, although in this episode they are learning how to be sarcastic, how to tell jokes, and how to interact with Carol in an increasingly human-like way, which is very scary. So this act of defiance by Zosia, although she's smiling, although it's what you would expect of a well-mannered human, this is the pluribus completely bypassing and ignoring a command that Carol gives to them. In the past, I assumed that the pluribus had a biological imperative to obey whatever Carol said, but that was never the case. They simply did it because it was easier to do so and they wanted to do so. But there's nothing stopping them from simply disobeying Carol. So that is the first couple seconds of this episode here. Already 8 minutes in. Okay? So the very next thing that happens in this scene is that, of course, Carol is experiencing some social difficulties. She comes off as very autistic in this episode, not as an insult, merely as a statement. I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome myself, so of course I'm not knocking Carol by insinuating that she might be autistic herself. But she comes off as very autistic. However, I won't diagnose her. Certainly not. She could just be someone who has social difficulties. That is possible without you having to be autistic. Zosia asks to clink glasses. She asks for a cheers with Carol. In episode 1, Helen asked Carol for a cheers as they were drinking at the bar. Carol showed some familiar defiance. She wasn't angry at Helen, but she's like, no, I'm not clinking glasses with a Pepsi, a soft drink. In this scene, Carol is not drinking alcohol. She's drinking punch, and she immediately acquiesces, immediately agrees, displaying some agreeableness that she did not have before with the pluribus, and clinking glasses immediately. So I was saying in last episode that there's a lot of marriage imagery, a lot of like restart imagery. That's something new was happening, that the relationship between Carol and Zosia was changing dramatically, that it was about to get serious, both perhaps romantically and serious as in this manipulation is going to accelerate. It is going to become much more difficult to navigate and to separate. So we see Zosia clearly making use of Helen's memories of Carol's relationships. She is learning humor. She is learning sarcasm. She is learning the common, conversational traits that Helen and Carol might have had, such as clinking glasses, not talking too much, wanting to, as they were in the icy retreat, kind of just be silent and observe things. The pluribus is clearly ramping up their level of attack in this weakened social state that Carol is in. And as we'll see as we go on, because of Carol's social state, because of her touched starvedness, because of her solitary confinement that she was in, she's highly receptive to this warmth that Zosia is presenting toward her, even against her will, even subconsciously. In the next part of this sequence, Zosia makes note of that Belladonna painting. I mentioned in the previous episode's discussion that the Belladonna is by Georgia O'Keeffe. It is a painting of a flower that is poisonous that I found out. But even more important than the poisonousness of this flower itself is who Georgia O'Keeffe was and what she represents thematically in the artistic world. She was a woman who, of course, was a painter in a time where there were not many painters who were women and who were successful. Additionally, her paintings went against the grain of what was traditionally considered high art at the time. It's a little bit abstract compared to what other people were painting around her time. She was also a person who underwent a sort of gender identity journey of herself. I believe she commonly would be seen wearing male clothes when she lived in New Mexico, I believe, where she was painting. And she lived a life that was just all around generally non-standard for a woman of her time. So to artists who are in the future, they view Georgia O'Keeffe as a symbol of trailblazing, of a symbol of self-discovery, of a symbol of becoming your true self over the course of your artistic career. Carol seems to have a particular fascination with this painting. She stares at it for long amounts of time. She smiled at it in the museum, and it sits squarely in between Zosia and Carol in this scene for pretty much the whole time. I think that has to mean something. Zosia certainly notices this painting and makes a remark about it. Carol says she was planning on returning it anyway. She seems, I don't know, Carol seems, when she was answering Zosia, she seemed a little, I don't know if it was embarrassed, like she was trying to come up with a lie as to why she had it, or if she seemed even confused herself as to why she had it and why she was so fascinated with the painting. But either way, she says she doesn't want animals roaming into the museum and rubbing up against the painting, as if that is a likely occurrence so soon. I think it is. Maybe it isn't. But Zosia offers to have members of the Hive secure these museums and ones like them. And Carol immediately, without thinking much at all, agrees this is not something she would have ever done before her experience with solitary confinement. I wasn't able to decipher myself whether or not Carol was intentionally scheming in the scene, being agreeable in order to get closer to the Hive, or if this was a genuine desire of hers. Let me know what you guys think. And then we move on to the continuation of their small talk. I call it a continuation with air quotes because it comes to an abrupt end with, I put in my notes here, OMG, so awkward. They're like newlyweds. I don't even think newlyweds are like this. This is something completely different. This is like, they are two people who have never interacted before. And I will mute that video. I just realized that you guys could hear it. So what I was saying, in case the video was too loud for you and you couldn't hear what I was saying, we have this awkward scene here where Carol and Zosia sit in silence for a little while, and then Carol admits she doesn't know what to talk about. This, in my mind, is a genuine confession. It is very honest. It is very vulnerable. In continuance with the running theme over this episode of some things are intentionally manipulative in order to grant additional closeness, in order to gain additional information. But in almost everything Carol does, there is also a truthfulness and a vulnerability in her sort of interaction with Zosia. And this is one of them. She is genuinely, I think, someone who struggles with social interaction. I think this is something that started long before the joining, before this signal was sent to Earth. As I said in the HDP episode, she is unintentionally abrasive to other people. She was abrasive to Diabate. In just pretty much every other scene where she interacts with someone who is not her own mind, she upsets them in some way. She pushes them away in some manner. And I think that this is not something that started after the joining. I think this is a personality trait of Carol herself, something that she is insecure about, as we saw during the HDP episode when she finds out that she was being excluded. She goes into the bathroom to cry because of her exclusion. This is most likely something that has happened to her before in the past. That's my own headcanon, at least, about Carol as a person. She comes off as a very lonely individual. And I put in my notes here that Carol's social abilities have deteriorated. She is very choppy. She's always choppy, but she's even more choppy now. And Zosia seems in this moment to take on the role slightly or partially like almost a therapist in a way. I put in my notes here, it's like Carol is like an autistic child and Zosia is the psychiatrist or the special needs teacher, being very kind to her, setting things up in a way that is comfortable for Carol. I also put here that this scene touched me very deeply. I said it earlier. I'm someone who was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, autism, level 1. I have struggled very severely with those early stages of making friendship, such as small talk, such as engaging with peers, reciprocity, coming off as non-abrasive, and so on and so forth. All of the things that you see Carol struggling with in this show so far. So yeah, it's an all-around great scene. I think, with COVID and AI and the loneliness epidemic that is spread all around the world, I think this scene will be very relatable to a lot of people. It should also be very frightening because we as humans are vulnerable to a force like the pluribus that does offer a simulation of that social connection to individuals. And it's most effective on people like Carol, who have just undergone a long period of solitude. So the next part here is that Zosia suggests a board game for them to play, since Carol is having difficulties with starting or maintaining a conversation with her. Now, there's a lot going on in the scene, and we're going to take a look at all of it. Carol is no longer reacting negatively when Zosia accesses Helen's memories. So, what I mean by that is Carol is looking through the games in that little entertainment console, and she suggests chess. And Zosia remarks that she's missing a white rook. This is something only Helen, the other individual living in the house, would know. And Carol doesn't react like she would have in the past. I don't know if that is an act she's putting up as a part of this charm offensive, or if she just doesn't care anymore as a result of being in what is effectively solitary confinement for an entire month. At the same time, this is the first example of many examples throughout this episode of the two of them simultaneously trying to out-strategize the other. So Carol is looking for a game that the two of them can play. She suggests chess at first. Zosia immediately says, yeah, or I think maybe not for chess, but one of the other games that Carol mentioned earlier. And Carol identifies that actually, no, that would not be a good game to play with the pluribus, because the pluribus would have all of the skill of every chess grandmaster combined. So Carol identifies that she would be at a permanent disadvantage when playing this type of a game with Zosia. And she goes through the various games, weighing whether or not there would be a way for Carol to even the playing field between her and Zosia. While it's being done with just these little board games here, it is a image or a foreshadowing of the grand strategy, sort of secret outmaneuvering that the two of them are trying to do to one another. In the real world, Carol needs to find a way to play the game with the pluribus in a way that allows her to maintain secrecy concerning all of the information that she's gathering, her plans, and so on and so forth. As we move to the card game that they play at the table, we see a verbal reference to this game that is being played when Carol says, "Are you letting me win?" And Zosia says, "Keep playing and you'll find out." This is representative of the sort of meta game being played between them, with both of them trying to defeat the other.
Are you letting me win? Or do you just suck at this?
Keep playing and you'll find out.
So yeah, that is what is going on here in this scene. We move on to the auditorium. And in this scene, there's a couple interesting things that happened between them that teach us or show us sort of what is going to happen to Carol as we move into the finale. I put here in my notes that this auditorium scene was kind of like a first date between Carol and Zosia, and the beginning of what I thought was the end for Carol. And in this scene, we find out some stuff about the hive and how they preserve energy and transfer heat while they sleep. They all sleep in a big area because it's easier to heat and yada, yada, yada. However, first off, this shot here with Carol and Zosia overlooking the auditorium, I was getting vibes that this story would be one where Carol became the bad guy, so to speak. Kind of like how in Breaking Bad, Walter White started off as the good guy, and he sort of became just another cartel bad guy that we have in that kind of a show. And with Carol here, I get the sense that the hive knows that it cannot convert Carol to joining the pluribus. But what it might be able to do is to get Carol to a state where she's so attached to Zosia and thereby so attached to the hive that she becomes a sort of extension of them without being one of them. In this case, in my notes, I put, it kind of looks like they are nobles standing above their people, their kingdom, with Carol being someone akin to a queen or a king, and Zosia being like the king's guard or the queen's guard in this scene. We also see that Carol lies down to sleep in this auditorium at the end of the day. But when she wakes up, her arm is around Zosia and she looks kind of confused about it all. I think that was very intentional, first off, that she looked uncomfortable or confused as to how that happened. As I said earlier in the video, when we looked at the scene, when we were just taking a look at Carol's sections of the episode, it's almost like the writers are telling us that there are actions that Carol is taking consciously, which is trying to go on this charm offensive, trying to manipulate the hive in order to gain more information. But then at the same time, the manipulation that the hive is doing against Carol is unconsciously taking an effect with Carol very strongly, to the point where, and metaphorically, that she is becoming closer to the hive against her will. In this scene, she lies down to sleep next to Zosia consciously, but unconsciously, she puts her arm around Zosia. I think Carol is in for, a very bad situation here if she continues to become attached to the pluribus. I think the lines between what is manipulation and what is being manipulated are already beginning to blur right off the bat. Again, in their next outing, when they were hiking and they saw a train, we're going to start off with something that is revealed through Carol here, which is a reminder to the audience that the pluribus does not know. The pluribus cannot be surprised. It cannot learn anything new. It can't experience anything new except for what the 13 survivors, the 13 immune individuals, give to them that is new. We're going to see that again with Carol's White Caro. But here, Carol tells Zosia another interesting fact about herself, which is that she loves the train horn sound. And Zosia seems genuinely happy that she is able to learn something new. And this is a reminder to the audience that just as when Carol was trying to pick out a game that would provide an even footing between them, so she picked a game that relied on chance rather than skill or technique. In this case also, we're reminded that the pluribus knows a lot and it's capable of a lot, but it cannot read Carol's mind. It does not know what she doesn't tell them. Carol is free to lie to them and they will be none the wiser. So Carol's inner mind, her inner thoughts, and her inner secrets are currently the only upper hand she has against the pluribus. The element of surprise, I think, is very important to being a human. The ability to not be able to read other people's minds is very important to being a human. And Carol brings that into this conflict that she has with the pluribus as her main source of getting an upper hand. Carol also asks Zosia how she communicates with the plurb that is currently moving the train so that they can blare the horn for her. And Zosia lets us know that it is the result of the electromagnetic field that every human being has. She mentions to Carol that she has one. It just goes unused. Now, immediately when she said this, I've had this theory since the second episode that the ability to make the pluribus seize up was a uniquely Carol ability. Now, unfortunately, as of like 20 minutes ago, I have watched the season finale, and I now know that that is no longer true. Other individuals can make the pluribus hive seize up. But I just found this scene interesting that as we move into the second season, electricity, radio frequencies, electromagnetic fields are all going to become a very, very important thing to pay attention to. We also know that Zosia says that their communication is homeostatic. So, for instance, when you are walking out in the sun and you begin to sweat, you didn't tell yourself to sweat. Your body just sweats on its own because things within your body communicated with each other unconsciously so that you can maintain your body temperature. That is the way that the hive communicates with one another. It's homeostatic. Apparently, according to Zosia, I don't know how it works exactly, neither does she, but it seems like they just kind of communicate with one another without having to think about it, without having it be conscious. They just know what every other member of the hive knows. And this occurs through this electromagnetic field. Now, if someone is able to figure out how to disturb this electromagnetic field, they could essentially block off a specific member of the hive from every other member and effectively create some individuality among the pluribus. Then we move on to their little spa date here, and Carol continues to fish for information from Zosia. She asks specifically about feeling, sensory feeling. In this section of the episode, she asks Zosia, if Zosia feels something, does everyone else in the pluribus feel it? And Zosia denies that conclusion. She says that they're aware that something is happening, but they don't necessarily feel it themselves, as feeling everything that every other member of the pluribus would be feeling would be a complete and total sensory overload. Now, something, as we see in the finale, something about the seizing up that happens when negative emotions are directed at them causes this ability to filter out the senses, I believe, of the other members of the pluribus to collapse. So in my mind, this is not something that I heard from the show or I picked up from the show, but in my mind, when Carol yells at the pluribus or when Manusos yells at the pluribus, every member of the hive begins to seize up because the communication chain between them becomes extremely volatile. They cannot block out the sensations of every other member of the pluribus, and they start to seize up due to the overwhelming nature of what is going on. Their next outing is the biggest bombshell of the episode because it takes place at the observatory, where we finally see Carol asking about the origins of the pluribus, and Zosia offers up whatever information she has. Now, Zosia says that the pluribus, are thankful to the people or the beings on Kepler 22b for helping spread them across the universe. Now, I saw people on social media assuming that this means that this virus or this frequency originates from Kepler 22b. I didn't take it that way, actually. I felt that it was open-ended. I felt that there's room for interpretation that Kepler 22b could just be one node in a series of planets that have fallen to this pluribus virus. We know that the people on Earth, the pluribus, want to create a gigantic antenna to spread this frequency to other inhabited planets. That very same thing could have occurred on Kepler 22b when the beings of that planet were invaded by that same frequency. So it doesn't necessarily mean that Kepler 22b is the originator of this alien invasion. It could be the case that the Earth is the 50th planet to get taken over, and Kepler 22b was the 49th. Again, with every bit of information that Carol receives from the Pluribus, there is an act of manipulation from the Pluribus onto Carol herself. In this scene, we see Zosia taking the initiative to turn off all of the lights in the area so that the light pollution doesn't block Carol's ability to see the stars clearly. This also occurs as they are both surrounded by red. Again, I don't know why Zosia's color association has changed from blue to red. In episode 8, we'll see the two of them alternate between, episode 9, the finale. In episode 9, we'll see the two of them alternate between clothing that is the color blue or red. So sometimes Zosia will be blue, sometimes she'll be red, and Carol likewise. I don't know what this means yet, but again, we know that the color purple is extremely important to Carol. In the Blood Song of Waikaro, chapter 16, that Apple released on Apple Books, we learn that Carol calls her fans not the Waikarians, but the true purples. So she calls her fans true purples. It's no mistake that we continue to see Zosia flip back and forth between red and blue throughout this season, especially in these last 2 episodes. Again, let me know if you guys have any idea what the color theory in these episodes could mean for the future of Pluribus. So we see in the very next scene another instance of Carol having the upper hand because she is able to hide information from the hive in a way that the hive is not able to hide information toward her. So Zosia comes up to her, again, wearing red now, no longer wearing blue colored clothing. She says to Carol, "Does this mean what we think it means?" And Carol generally looks kind of startled. She's like, what do you mean by that question? Because Carol is obviously writing on her whiteboard her notes from all the information gathering that she is getting from the Pluribus and keeping Zosia in the dark about this. Now, we'll see the line between this lie that she tells, that she's writing Waikaro, begin to blur as we continue further on into this episode. She genuinely does start to write Waikaro, not as a means of continuing the lie, but I think out of genuine inspiration.
Does this mean what we think it means?
What?
You're writing again?
Writing Waikaro. Yeah. Yeah.
We see on this whiteboard Carol's notes that she is adding onto, right? We pick off on number 6 after the, isolation, the solitary confinement that the hive put her under. And I know there have been people online asking, why is it that the hive specifically wants to convert every single person on the planet? Isn't it enough if they get like 99.999% of people? Why can't they just continue on with their mission? And we see the answer in number 12. The hive wants to build a giant antenna to send this frequency to the very next inhabited planet so that they can convert everyone there as well. But right under that, Carol writes that they need all power in the world to send that frequency out. Now, we've seen time and time again that the hive is prioritized with conserving energy. We saw that they turned off all the lights in New Mexico in an earlier episode to conserve energy. That really freaked Carol out, and she wanted all of the lights turned on again. So each and every immune individual creates around them an inefficient usage of the Earth's resources: electricity, water, food, and so on and so forth. Just for Carol alone, they need to keep the city of Albuquerque all filled up with people, filled up with electricity to keep everything running, to keep it alive so that Carol doesn't go crazy. The same is true for Diabate and every single other immune individual. So I think the reason why they need so desperately to convert every single person into the hive is because they need every last bit of energy that they can get from the earth to make this transferable to the next planet. But they can't do that if every human being is not on the same page, communicating instantly, and on board with the ultimate goal. On their next outing, they are playing this game here. And once again, we have the color theory stuff going on here. So Carol's ball is purple. Zosia's ball is red. Again, Zosia associated with the color red. I can't see it too well, but it also looks like the little paddle or tool that they use to hit the ball. Zosia's has some red stripes on it, and Carol's has some either purple or blue stripes. The goal here is a red goal, and Carol is sitting directly inside of it, inside of this shot. We see Carol wearing a t-shirt that is a very light pink, a type of red, and we see Zosia wearing pants that are blue. We're closer here in this scene, so I can confirm that the paddle that Carol holds has a blue stripe on it, and Zosia's has a red stripe on it. Again, this red, blue, and purple imagery has to mean something. Another very scary thing is that the hive is adapting to Carol. We know that the hive has issues with humor, sarcasm, being too literal about things. We saw that in the auditorium scene. Carol asked, is there going to be an orgy here? And Zosia says, not unless you want it to, in a very serious manner. And then she sort of adjusts a little bit and plays it off as a joke. Here we see that Zosia has become fully acclimatized to Carol's sense of humor. She's able to tease Carol now in a way that Carol enjoys, which is just yet another layer to this emotional manipulation that the hive is getting and using against Carol in order to make her slow down or potentially completely stop her quest to save the world. So we have, again, 4 main colors: yellow, red, blue, and purple. Yellow is associated with Carol. Blue was associated with Zosia. It has now become red, that is also associated with Zosia. And this color purple was associated with Helen and Carol in their icy retreat. When they were looking at the aurora, they saw purple. Carol, that color purple became significant to her. She included it in her Blood Song of Waikaro. She calls the gods in that book Aurora, and she calls her fans True Purple. So purple is symbolic of that relationship Carol had with Helen. And it seems that Zosia is now beginning to tap into that and become more purple herself. Carol is slipping by this point. She is succumbing to the manipulation little by little. We get to the scene where they are at this diner that Carol used to frequent when she was younger, just starting off her writing career. This diner burnt down, but Zosia rebuilt it very recently, knowing from Carol's interactions with the staff at this place that it was one of Carol's favorite locations. And Carol is taken aback by this. She forgets until she remembers that, hey, this place burned down years ago. How is it here now? Zosia reveals that they rebuilt it for her very quickly. And that seems to frighten Carol a bit. She remembers that this is all a simulation. These people are not real. This building should not be here. The only reason this building was created was to lull Carol into a sense of comfort and complacency. We'll see this again in the finale. when Zosia and Carol are on their own version of an icy retreat, where Carol once again realizes that all of this has been nothing more than a simulation designed to lull her into complacency. The hive has a biological imperative to convert Carol into the hive, in my opinion, because they need every last drop of energy that the earth has to offer. And people being immune like Carol causes them to use electricity in inefficient ways in order to keep them satisfied. Although Carol walks away at the end of this scene, she does not walk away for good, especially by the end of this episode, but continuing on into the finale, she has become even more attached to the hive than she ever was in this episode. So we've made it to the kiss scene of this episode, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the tragedy of the relationship between Carol and Zosia here. I'll probably talk about it again when I do my finale discussion, but for now, Carol and Zosia, I know some people think that the hive cannot love. I disagree. I think the hive feels what it believes to be love for Carol. And Carol likewise feels love for Zosia, and by extension, the hive. However, Carol's mission to save the world will inevitably, quote unquote, kill this Zosia. And Zosia's mission to convert Carol into the pluribus will metaphorically kill this version of Carol. So they both love each other, but the end goal of their actions will result in one of them dying and becoming a different thing than they are, than the one that the other happens to love. That is a tragedy. There is no way that this relationship ends in a positive manner. It's going to be very terrible when we see who finally wins. I'm personally of the mind that the hive is evil. I know that, some of the actors and a lot of people who've been watching the show have been saying that the pluribus hive genuinely is nice from their perspective. They don't have any motives to torture or hurt another person, so they're not evil. But I personally think all of that is an act. I think the hive cannot harm a human being physically. And I think the reason being because if they were to harm another person, that person would harm them back in self-defense, directing a bunch of negative emotion toward them and making the entire pluribus hive seize up. It's easier for the pluribus to do things nicely, to take over the earth in a way that seems gentle, than having to deal with this massive weakness of theirs, which is that they seize up when negative emotions are directed towards them. So I think, yes, the hive loves Carol, but this is some sort of a perverse love that does not care for the individuality of Carol herself. Carol reveals in this scene that she likes Zosia. Zosia reveals that she knows Carol will never give up trying to save the world. Carol says something very powerful, which is that someone has to put the world right again. And then they kiss, they make love, and then Carol goes back to writing Caro. This was very dastardly on behalf of the pluribus. They are doing for Carol what Helen was never able to do for Carol herself, which is to genuinely like Carol's writing. We learned that Helen didn't really like Caro. She thought it was cotton candy. And then for her Bitter Chrysalis book, she thought it was just okay. Whereas the pluribus experiences what I believe to be not a lie, since they can't lie, but a genuine, extreme love for Carol's writing. And this is because the pluribus cannot experience anything new. They have the knowledge and the experience of every human being who was alive at the point of the joining. They've likely read almost every book, seen almost every art piece, heard every piece of music, had every conversation, played and mastered every game. The only new things they can experience are the things that the 13 survivors give to them that they had never given to anyone else previously. For Carol, this would be her own artistic imagination, her writing, her ability to create more chapters in her Why Caro series. The Pluribus loves this because to them, this is something they cannot give themselves. They cannot experience what it's like to write something new. They all instinctively know what every other member of the Pluribus is writing. So to them, any new piece of writing that they write feels like, like if another member of the Pluribus wrote a book, Zosia wouldn't care that much when she read it because she already knew what was in the book. But like I said earlier with Carol, like in the scene we see in the beginning with her trying to pick out a game that they can play that would give them even footing, and with the scene where Carol reveals to Zosia that she loves trains and the sounds that they make. And now when she gives Zosia this newest entry, this newest chapter in her book, it's being reinforced to us by the writers that the survivors have one upper hand against the Pluribus, and that is their own individual thoughts, their inner thoughts. The Pluribus cannot read their mind. The survivors, Carol, can lie to them. Carol can give them new experiences that they've never had before, and so on and so forth. The element of surprise is something that only the survivors can use against the Pluribus. That is their smoking gun. But for now, Carol is experiencing a simulation of what it would be like to be in a relationship with someone who truly loves and appreciates your art, even more than you yourself do, and is able to discuss it with you on a level that only a true lover of that art would be able to. This is, again, Zosia's way of filling Helen's place in Carol's mind, as the Pluribus knows how important Helen is to Carol, how much of an anchor Helen's death was to making Carol hate the Pluribus. And if they can just get Carol to forget about Helen and replace Helen with Zosia, they just might be able to slow Carol down enough that they can figure out how to convert her into the Pluribus before she can figure out how to stop them. We see Carol sort of staring outside of her window at Helen's grave. Longingly, she's remembering, and then here comes Zosia to fill in that pane of the window where Helen was and to take up that space in the literal shot of this scene where Helen is. Zosia takes that place. So that's it for the Shipwatch for this episode. I know there's probably a bunch more than I can talk about, but for now, I want everyone to not lose sight, like the way Carol lost sight in the finale. The Pluribus is doing this all to manipulate her. And while there are some genuine feelings blurring themselves within this sort of dual charm offensive that is going on both sides, at the end of the day, the Pluribus is not a human being. It does not have the same emotional sort of hacks or weaknesses that Carol has. It always keeps its eye on the prize, on the mission, on the goal, which is to convert Carol into the Pluribus. And for now, Carol seems to be on the back foot. She seems to be slipping. Thankfully, Manusos comes in the very next episode to attempt to snap Carol out of it. And we'll talk more about that in the next discussion video.